We're super excited to have you all here. We'll just jump in and get started. Many of you, I think almost everyone knows Greg Nathan. If you don't, you're in for a great surprise. Great pleasure today. Greg, I'm going to just read your bio so that those who don't know you have a little history on your background. Greg, as a psychologist and best-selling author, Greg is widely regarded as the leading international thinker on people issues in franchising. His models of franchising excellence and empirical research into the drivers of the franchisee satisfaction have shaped the way franchisors all over the world lead their networks. Greg has been delivering deeply engaging and interactive CEO forums, field manager boot camps, and culture workshops virtually for the last 10 years. So this whole new environment is not new to Greg. It's just new to many of the rest of us. In 2018, Greg was presented by the IFA with the Crystal Compass Award for Leadership Excellence in Franchising. And Greg, thank you so much. Welcome. We are so delighted to have you here today. We are going to go for about 60 minutes today. Please put your questions in chat. We're going to answer questions throughout. Greg loves it when it's super interactive, and so let's put him on the spot. Let's get all the hard questions.
I just want to give a special hello to Kelly Matson, who's our head of education. I can see Kelly there. Hi, Kelly. And Lindsay Thompson, I can see you there, a fellow psychologist who does a lot of work in the franchising space. Nice to have you. Can everybody see that there, Katrina? That's slides we're going to work through.
I can see it. Can everyone give us a nod, a thumbs up in chat? Okay, great.
Right. So I've called the session Creating Happy Franchisees. And just to start off with the interaction, I'm going to ask you if you could please think about what's your energy number on a scale of 1 to 10. And I'd like you to pop your number into the chat feed, please. And let's do a little bit of an average of where we're at as a team. So who's going to be first in? Whoa, Paul. So we got Joel. Yeah, keep it coming. We've got quite a few 10s. Got no 1s. One is I want to be back in bed. That's for me because pretty early in the morning here. Fantastic. So the running average, it's coming in at 8.2. Got a few 6s, that's cool. The fact is that when you name your energy, it often tends to go up a little bit. So it's a good hope. If you are a 10, I don't want it to drop a little bit. Fantastic. So we're sitting on 8.2 average. Thanks, guys. Now, here's what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about why some personal and business relationships are likely to feel a little strained at the moment. Both business, I'm talking business and personal. 3 characteristics of sustainably great franchise networks. It's pretty pointless if you're doing great work for a year or two and then the whole system implodes. And I'm going to talk about research over 20 years of franchise systems that have really been able to sustain great franchise relationships, profitable franchisee, profitable franchisor, happy customers. We'll share some research on how your culture affects franchisee satisfaction and the impact you can have as a franchisor team. I'll take you through an important model called the franchise business journey and the implications of how this impacts on how you support your franchisees. We'll revisit what's been going on strategically in Australia because we're a little bit of a canary in the coal mine in Australia about things to come. And I think there's some important lessons there for everybody in North America. And then I'm going to share some interesting insights into the brain. And we're going to talk about the link between the brain and franchise relationships. And I'm going to close with a franchisee factor model, a summary of that, which many of you may have seen before. And people tell us they find it particularly interesting and useful. Now, to kick off, I often show this slide because it's a good analogy in terms of change. So if you were to imagine that you're sailing this beautiful little boat across a calm bay, there's a gentle breeze. The boat's a little old, it's got a bit of rot in the hull, some tears in the sales, but no problems because everything's calm. And then suddenly, boom, we're in rough seas. Strong winds, waves pounding against the hull of your little boat. The sails are stretched to the limit. And that little bit of rot in the hull, because of the waves bashing, is starting to leak. So we're starting to take on water. The sails being stretched, starting to tear and rip. And so we're in a bit of trouble. Now, relationships are like this. When everything's calm and beautiful, you can have some underlying tensions. It's not going to cause any major problems. But when you get unpredictable change, stress, existing relationship weaknesses are going to be exposed. And that's the environment we're in, right? So many of you, I'm sure, have seen an increase in relationship tensions. And I'm talking about at the family level, also the business level. It's absolutely normal during periods of intense change. And I just want to remind you of that. But the important thing is that we do what we can to strengthen those relationships and strengthen that trust. Now, there's always going to be a certain level of creative tension in interdependent relationships. Interdependent relationship is where you can't just walk away when it's uncomfortable or you don't like what's going on. So think marriage, think franchising. And so the principles that we're going to cover here today, you can apply both in your personal lives as well as in your franchising. Because in the franchise relationship, we're operating under a shared brand. Everyone's reputation is affected by the actions of everyone else. And so when someone doesn't do the right thing, someone on the franchisor team or the franchisee team, everybody gets affected. Now, so we talk a lot in our education sessions about how to manage this interdependence. And the principles, as I say, are relevant to all relationships where you can't just walk away. Now, I've got a question for you, and I'd like you to pop a brief response in the feed if you're comfortable doing this. But I want you to think for a moment about something you've done recently to help you maintain healthy work or family relationships. Now, just while you're thinking about that, I just ran inside to make myself a coffee just before the session. And because I was rushing, I spilt coffee all over the floor, right? And I was going to run back out to the office where I'm doing this session. And I thought, hang on a minute, my wife's going to get up in 10 minutes time. She's going to come into the kitchen. And if she sees the mess on the floor, it's not going to be good for my relationship. So I stopped and I put in a minute. That's why I was a bit delayed getting back, Katrina, wiping up the floor because it was the right thing to do. So we got some responses coming in. So Cara is saying, Katrina, why don't you read out some of the responses that are coming in?
Okay, so power list, ongoing communication. We've got increase the number of heart checks and gut checks with friends and family. Meditation. Let's see. Don't sweat the small stuff. One of my faves. Checking in just to check in, not with a specific agenda. One-on-ones with team members. More than ever, put yourself in the other person's shoes before acting or reacting. Listen more, talk less. Active listening. Spoke openly over some issues. Staying positive and checking in. These are just all so great. Have an open mind.
And I would suggest keep an eye on that sheet, on that feed, everybody, and you might want to make some notes yourself of things that you could use, because these are things that are working for people. I think the empathy one and the listening are obviously extremely important. Just a tip about empathy. We often think about empathy as, oh, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of the other person, like I really understand the other person's life. Often we don't. If you haven't experienced exactly, and I often say to franchisor teams, if you haven't actually run a small business yourself and had that 7-day a week, 24 hours a day anxiety of, are you going to meet payroll? And, how are we going to get cash flow positive? It's very difficult to genuinely know what the franchisee is going through. That doesn't mean you can't empathize. Now, empathy means you think about what are the issues that the other person is facing and is of concern to the other person. And you can find that out by asking good open-ended questions, like, tell me more about what's on your mind at the moment is a great question. But the other element to empathy that we can all practice, whether you've experienced what they're going through or not, is to wish them well. Just have that sense of, I really hope things work out well for that person. And that intention of wishing someone well is a form of empathy, which can be practiced no matter what your situation. So thank you, everybody, for that list. I'll give you one other tip about empathy, that if you're able to summarize back to someone what you're hearing them say, but in your own words, to give them evidence that you really have understood the concept of what they're telling you, if you get it right, watch very carefully that the person will nod and say something like, exactly, or that's right. And when you get that feedback from the other person, not only does that validate that you're on the right track, but it's extremely powerful for reducing defensiveness and getting them to start to engage with you in a more productive conversation. Now, I want to spend a couple of minutes just talking a bit about why I do what I do and why Franchise Relationships Institute exists. When I was in my 20s, I'm 65 now, so many, many years ago, I was at university studying psychology. Maybe some of you are still at university at the moment. And I had a part-time job working for a company-owned store, a group of bakeries. So I'd get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'd do a day's work there, go home, have a shower, and go off to university. And around this time, the company started to franchise its stores. And I found it really fascinating because the franchisees who were coming in brought a very different mindset to the business than the store managers. And also some store managers became franchisees. And it was amazing to watch how their attitude to the business changed overnight, literally, when they moved from store manager to franchisee, particularly their commitment and their passion to the business. So I continued to work with that chain. I completed my psychology studies, and I used to manage stores for franchisees during my university holidays. And one day, a multi-unit franchisee that I'd worked for called me and asked if I'd like to become his business partner. So I took up the offer and I experienced life as a franchisee, an area manager. I was ultimately the head of marketing and operations for this fast-growing franchise network, which eventually grew and went public. Now, because of my psychology background, I was particularly interested in the nature of the relationship that we were having, between franchisee, franchisor. When I was a franchisee, I often was at loggerheads and in conflict with the franchisor team. And yet when I joined the franchisor team, I seemed to be falling into the same trap and be at loggerheads with my franchisees. And there was no training programs available at the time. I couldn't find any decent publications to explain what was going on. So in 1989, I decided to get back to my psychology and found what would become the Franchise Relationships Institute. And our mission is simply to foster the creation of profitable partnerships in the global franchising sector. We're very focused and very passionate on this mission and what we do. And I've been very privileged over the last 33 years to have worked with over 500 different brands across 16 different countries, thousands of franchisor executives like yourself, just trying to understand what are your pressures, what are your issues, what are your pain points, and how can we use science and evidence to give you some practical tools. Now, we continue to create tools, and I've written a number of books to help you to deal with these issues. And it's all aimed at being very practical. Now, when I was a franchisee and a franchisor executive, I made a mistake. And it's the same mistake that many people that we work with constantly make. And it's this: I thought that because I knew everything about, in my case, baking and selling bread, that I could effectively lead and motivate my franchisees. Now, the reality is that you are in two businesses. Every franchise or executive on the planet is in two businesses. You're in the business of delivering value to the end customer in whatever industry you're in, and you're also in the business of franchising. And what that means is we're in the business of putting people into business and helping them to succeed in a way that helps you grow your market share. So over the years, we've worked with hundreds of different brands like these. And what I've learned is that all franchisors have similar challenges. The best franchisors draw on the same best practices because we're all in this business we call franchising. Now, you may recognize some of these brands, and there's a lot more as well, but I would only classify about 20% of the franchisors that we've worked with as being in that category that I mentioned earlier, sustainably great. And they're sustainably great because they've had consistent, profitable growth at both the franchisor and the franchisee level, and they've sustained high levels of franchisee satisfaction. Now, there's three characteristics of sustainably great franchise networks, and one of these is they clearly understand what I'm saying to you now, that they are in the franchising business. Now, let's look at this first characteristic here, which we're going to call ongoing innovation, because a franchisee's capacity to innovate is always going to outstrip the franchisee's ability to accommodate that innovation. So to do this well, you need to understand the characteristics of the sigmoid curve, which popped up on the screen here for you. So I call this the curve of life. It applies to every living thing on the planet. It includes you, it includes me, my dog, plants, careers, products. Those of you who are in product development would recognize this as the product life cycle, and businesses. What the sigmoid curve predicts is that when you initiate something new, there's always going to be an initial struggle and a dip in performance, like the change that many of you would have experienced when you started working from home. You know, having to adjust, where do I sit and how do I get my internet, stable, and what am I going to do with the kids running around and so on and so forth. So we might do our best to respond and adjust, but it does take time to iron out any kinks before whatever we're doing starts to grow and succeed. But nothing is forever. And even when things are going well, successful franchisors are going to innovate relentlessly because they understand that each time, if they don't innovate relentlessly, they're going to hit a plateau and they're going to start to decline because their competitors are going to start to overtake them. And also that whenever they introduce something new, they need to take the franchisees with them through this dip. And this is where engagement is so important. And we've got to engage people at the emotional level as well as the head and the logic level. And once traction starts to take hold and we're growing, effective franchise networks will then innovate again, and then they'll do it again and again. Now, shortly, I'm going to show you how this curve applies to each of your individual franchisees. But for now, I just want to make the point that consistent change is vital for the health of your network. Most of you have been forced into change, and you've done very well. I want to congratulate everybody on the call for the amazing work that they've been doing to adapt and innovate, and the pivot word that we're often using these days. That's a change that's being forced on you. But what I'm encouraging you to do is when things settle down to continue to evolve. Now, the second characteristic of really sustainable, great franchise networks is this clarity around purpose and values. And often this sense of purpose revolves around making a positive difference to the community. It means putting all major decisions through. This is like the coffee filter I was using this morning to make my coffee. And, asking these questions, is it going to be right for the long term, not just for our brand, but for our culture, for all our various stakeholders? I want to ask you a question. This is to everyone on the call, and we're going to do a poll in a moment. And the question is this: who do you think is the most important stakeholder in your network? So I've given you 5 options there. And Cassie, if we could start the poll, thank you. So a poll should have appeared on your screens there. And I'd like everybody to, this is anonymous. Is it customers? Is it the franchise management team? Many of you. Is it the stockholders or the shareholders? Is it the franchisees? Is it the people who work for the franchisees? Who do you think is the most important stakeholder? Now, I'm going to preface this that this is a highly debated question. I'm going to give you a view, and some of you may not even agree with this, and that's fine. But let's at least give this some thought. So we've got almost 80% have completed the poll. So we're going to give it 4 more seconds, 3 more seconds. Come on, everyone, have a crack. Who do you think it is? 2, 1, cut. So Cassie, if we can show the results of the poll. So the majority of people on the call, 42%, say it's the franchisees, and very close behind, we've got customers. And then we've got the employees who serve the customers. Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I personally would agree with the majority of the group here, and I just want to explain why. But if you didn't put the franchisees, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm just going to explain our thinking here. So I'll just close that. There we go. Now, this is Cheryl Bachelder. Now, I interviewed Cheryl a few years ago when she was the CEO of Popeye's Chicken, and she'd previously led Popeye's through 5 years of consistent same-store sales and market share growth. They had a $70,000 year profit improvements per store, 400% increase in the stock price of that company, a queue of franchisees wanting more stores. So this is a nice situation to be in, hey? And Cheryl told me that the single most important question that she and her executive team tackled when she first became CEO, and she attributes this to the company's success at the time, was this question: who are our most important stakeholders? And to achieve consensus, they locked themselves away on a retreat. And they argued this for a couple of days. So the chief marketing officer argues that success is always dependent on satisfied customers, which is true. So they're the most important stakeholder. The financial officer argues that stockholders, if they don't have confidence in the company, because they're the owners of the company, and they dictate the share price ultimately and the company's value. So they're the most important person. The head of HR is saying it's all about the staff who are serving the customers. The operations manager or the VP of operations argued that it's the franchisees because they're ultimately responsible for delivering the customer experience. And after a couple of days of discussion, debate, soul searching, they concluded that the franchisees were the most important group. And they figured that if franchisees are doing a great job in running their businesses and looking after their staff, the customers are going to receive great service and a great experience. Sales are going to go up. The company and the shareholders are going to prosper. And so she said from that day on, every decision was put through this filter of how does this impact on our franchisees and our franchisee satisfaction. They actively collaborated with franchisees over products, marketing, store design, improvements, and so on. And I was very excited to meet her because I've always argued that if franchisees are doing a great job in running their business and they're profitable, most things fall into place. And it also means they're going to recommend your business model, so it makes it a lot easier for you to grow. So let's now look at the third characteristic of what we could say best practice franchise networks. And that's this commitment. It leads on nicely to the one we just talked about, a commitment to collaboration. Now, collaboration means working together to maintain a competitive edge. And what that means is that we need to focus on the things that are going to generate the most value. Franchisors have to, and franchisees have to, and then there's an overlap in the middle of those circles there where we all need to focus. Now, I'm going to just talk for a moment about the accountability of the franchisees and the accountability of the franchisor. And accountability is different to responsibility. The buck stops with you with accountability. You can't delegate it. So let's look at the franchisees' accountabilities. 1, create advocates for their business and for the brand by delivering that exceptional customer experience. You can't do that for them. Secondly, maximize their profit by growing their sales and controlling their costs. And finally, participating constructively in the franchise network. The franchisee is accountable, and you sometimes need to remind them to engage, to participate, to support reasonable brand initiatives. Now, on the other hand, the franchisor team, you have 3 accountabilities. Lead with credibility, and that means that you need to make competent, good data-driven decisions. You need to be trustworthy and transparent with information, and you need to genuinely show that empathy and care about the success, personal and business, of your franchisees. You need to provide relevant support, ensure that the support you're providing matches their evolving needs, and I'm going to talk a little bit more with you about that in a moment. And you, as the custodian of the brand, ultimately the buck stops with you. You must protect that brand. Now, the franchisee is responsible for looking after the brand, but if a franchisee mucks up and does the wrong thing, you will be held accountable for that. And the board of directors will ultimately be held accountable if the company does the wrong thing and the brand is severely damaged. Now, I'm just going to pause for a moment and check, Katrina, any questions just at this point that people might like to ask?
I have asked for questions a couple times. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to pop into the chat? Okay, here we go. What are the best ways to build and maintain relationship capital with our partners with limited travel and field support due to the pandemic?
Right. Could you just read that out again? I just missed the first bit.
What are the best ways to build and maintain relationship capital? Yeah.
Yeah. We're doing it now. I find Zoom is a terrific tool. Katrina mentioned we've been running a virtual business for 10 years. So I've created a culture in my business that I'm very proud of through a team that very seldom get to actually meet face to face. But I think you need to pay attention when you're on a Zoom call. And this is why I was suggesting if you want to have your cameras on, feel free, because a lot of the information that gets conveyed in a conversation is obviously body language. I think, so if you are using the telephone or whatever form of communication, pay attention to what you're doing. Don't try and do 2 things at once. And those of you on the call today, if you are reading your emails, stop. You think you can do 2 things at once. You can't. The science is absolutely in on this. You can only pay attention properly to one thing at a time. And if you want to learn and absorb what we're talking about here, you need to pay attention. And the same goes for your conversations with your franchisees. They know if you have that genuine empathy with them when you're having a conversation, phone, Zoom, whatever it is, or not. But you don't need to have that face to face. So that's what I would say is very important at the moment. Is there a question there?
Yeah. Next question.
For that.
Yeah. Next question, Greg, is can you expand on what you do mean by relative support?
Yeah, relative means that it's appropriate for the situation, because everything's relative in life. So somebody who's been running their business for 9 months is going to have a different set of needs than somebody who's been running the business for 9 years. And I'll explain this actually now. So thank you for that question. And there's another question from Lauren, is it?
Sure. Well, and also from Charles. So being an operation part of franchisor, we face challenges on field presence, kind of hierarchy issues, how to deal with it. I'm not clear on that question. Are you, Greg?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think he's talking about what's really important. So anything that impacts on the brand, I'd say there's 3 things that you need to just, this is a good checklist for you. If your conversation is not either about brand alignment and the franchisee making sure that the reputation is protected, that's a vital area. If the conversation is not about profitability and how to improve franchisee profitability, or if the conversation is not about how can we work well together, then you've got a low priority conversation and probably shouldn't be wasting time. So the 3 important things: brand alignment, improving franchisee profitability, and having that collaborative relationship.
Great. Thank you, Greg. The next one is from Lauren, who's sharing, I'm constantly challenged with franchisee requests that we cannot accommodate. Any recommendations to be able to manage franchisee expectations?
Yeah, just tell the truth. Be honest. If you can't do something, just say, look, I'm sorry. This is where the empathy is important. You need to acknowledge the request and say, so what you're asking is this, and I think I understand why this is important to you. However, in the interest of an honest, open relationship, I want to be straight with you. We do not have the resources at the moment to deliver on that, and here's why. Or we have other priorities at the moment. I can't accommodate that. However, let's talk about maybe some other options on helping you to meet that particular need. Because if you understand the actual need that the person has, sometimes the request they're making is not the best way to solve that anyway. And I find this, and Katrina, you would have found this in your work with clients. Sometimes people will say, well, I want someone to come to my conference and talk about, a particular topic. And when Katrina says, tell me more about why that's important to you, it turns out that topic is not the most relevant topic. It's another one. Yep.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Let's move on now. So thank you for those questions. And I want to take you through what we call the franchisee business journey. So, and in a moment, I'm going to ask you, what stage do you think most of your franchisees are at? So the first stage we talk about, I'm mapping it onto the sigmoid curve, is investigation. So we haven't quite started yet. So this is where the franchisee is looking at whether they want to be a franchisee with your group. They're probably looking at a few options. They may even be working for your company at the moment, either at support office, or they could be working for a franchisee. Once they sign the franchise agreement, they go into what we call initiation, and that's where the training and the induction and so on begin. And when they actually move into the opening of the business and take over, we call that the perspiration stage. And you know why we've called it the perspiration stage, because it's really hard and people have to sweat it out. And that's where the sigmoid curve is kicked in and we're going through that dip. And then once the franchisee reaches break even and they breathe that sigh of relief, finally I'm making money, we call that consolidation. Everything's coming together. We've got a team around us, we've got customers coming in, and it's a really nice place to be. But nothing is forever, as I said earlier. And at some stage, normally about 5 to 7 years in, the franchisee is going to start to either rust out or burn out. They get kind of tired, they get over the business. And at this point, if you do not take them through the next stage, they're going to plateau and decline. And we call this the reformation stage. So leading the franchisee through refurbishment, moving the business, bringing in a new partner, getting them involved in maybe some collaborative consultative committees or whatever it is. And then they're going to go through the process again. And that's what I was saying earlier. And so thank you for the person that was asking about the meaning of relative. that the support that you provide is going to be different at each of these stages. So we now field manager boot camps, and in the excellence master classes we hold for C-levels and so on, we talk about the different types of support that you provide to franchisees at these different stages. Now, I want to introduce you to someone. This is not the woman who wrote the Harry Potter books. This is Adele Ferguson. And Adele Ferguson is a journalist. Now, we're in volatile times at the moment. In Australia, the franchising sector has been going through extremely volatile times for 3 years. And she largely instigated this through that trophy that she's holding up as an award that she won for journalism in Australia. It's like it's called the Walkley Awards. And that could be the heads of a number of the CEOs of Australia's largest franchise networks, banks, and other institutions. She's done a series of investigative articles on where people have not been doing the right thing. Now, one of the companies I felt she unfairly attacked in the early stages back in 2015 was 7-Eleven. And it was due to franchisees underpaying staff. Now, the franchisor had done nothing wrong, but perhaps they had turned a blind eye to what was going on in the network, or hadn't got involved enough. But I felt the franchisor was very unfairly treated in this case. However, it led to the federal government changing the laws in Australia to make franchisors legally responsible for the conduct of their franchisees in how they pay and manage their staff. Now, this was a massive shock to the franchising sector here in Australia and internationally. Now, I know in America, there's been an ongoing battle with the National Labour Relations Board on this issue. But in Australia, we lost the fight several years ago. Now, then she went on to another group, Retail Food Group. And these were one of the largest multinational franchisors in Australia. And she attacked them for poor conduct as a franchisor. And she claimed that they were exploiting franchisees, mum and dad franchisees, by gouging them in a number of areas and taking advantage of them. And while RFG suffered badly, this series of press articles started to appear attacking the franchising brand. And it resulted in a federal government inquiry into the franchising sector. Now, these are two of the politicians who were leading this Senate inquiry. And a report came out, and as you can see, the focus of the report is fairness in franchising. And it focuses on franchisors being more transparent and fair in how they deal with their franchisees. And I mentioned earlier, I do believe Australia has been a bit of a canary in the mine shaft, and that our experience in Australia should be a warning to all countries and North America that transparency, collaboration, and fairness are going to increasingly be raised by governments and franchisee lobby groups as areas that franchisors need to focus on, and in some cases need to do better in. Now, I want to make the point here that fairness is not just important for building trust in business relationships. It's also a biologically programmed social instinct in humans and in all animals. All right, now I want to show you an experiment conducted by Professor Frans de Waal, and he's using 2 capuchin monkeys here. Now, these monkeys prefer grapes to cucumber. So to a capuchin monkey, grape is like chocolate and cucumber is like, whatever. So what happens when one monkey is given grapes for performing a little task in exchanging for a rock, and the other monkey is given cucumber? Let's take a look.
Getting grape and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests a rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
So, unless you want to stimulate rage in your franchisees, you need to be seen. Not only do you need to do the right thing, you need to be seen to be acting fairly and doing the right thing. And not only is this a smart thing to do and the right thing to do, there's also some clear business benefits here as well. Now, we've just completed a major study on franchisee satisfaction, and we're constantly doing this work with over 7,000 franchisees on what drives, we call it an ACE mindset. And an ACE mindset is where franchisees are going to be an advocate. They're going to validate your franchise concept and recommend it. They're going to be committed to reinvesting in their business and staying on, and they're going to be engaged in supporting your initiatives. Now, wouldn't it be great if all your franchisees had this ACE mindset, right? Now, the biggest predictor of whether or not franchisees have an ACE mindset is whether they feel their expectations are being met. And that's not just about the money. This is a mistake we make. We think it's just about the money. If they're making money, they're happy. It's not true. And if money is important, if they're not making money, they won't be happy. But the more money they make, it doesn't correlate with the happier they become. And some of the most angry and dissatisfied franchisees that I've seen are often the most profitable. And I'm sure many of you will have experienced this because there are other needs that kick in besides financial. And these are needs for respect, the need for status and being treated with importance, the need for a feeling of being taken seriously, the need for control and other things. Okay. Now, in this study, we also reviewed detailed comments from 1,800 franchisees in particular who said, I do not trust my franchisor. And we wanted to know why. And 3 factors accounted for 47% of the comments where trust had been broken. And they were a feeling that the franchisor was making self-serving decisions that advantaged themselves at the expense of the franchisees. There was a lack of transparency or perceived lack of transparency and openness, including hiding information and not admitting mistakes and trying to cover things up. And the third one was not consulting or asking or listening to franchisees on the issues that impact on them. So 3 big things. So pay attention to those 3 things, take a note of these and think about how can we make sure that we don't fall into the trap of doing these things. So you need to be very careful in managing the expectations of your franchisees. Sometimes you may be doing the right thing, but you're not communicating it enough. But I would argue that one of the most important expectations that we all have in life is to be taken seriously and to be listened to and treated respectfully and fairly, as I said earlier. Now, earlier we talked about the franchisee business journey. Just to wrap up now, I want to introduce you to another model, which is the emotional journey that franchisees travel on. And you could liken the business journey to the destinations their businesses move through. The emotional journey is how they feel about traveling on this journey with you. Now, Cassie, we've got a little bit of a poll. I wanted to just gauge who in the group today has heard of the franchisee factor model. So could I ask everybody just to respond to one of these questions? Never heard of it, fine. Vaguely familiar with it, very familiar with it, or I know it so well I could teach it. So we've got 60% of you have voted. Keep them coming in. What's your experience of the franchisee factor? Okay, so we'll close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look, Cassie. What do we got? Fantastic. Most of you have never heard of it. So that makes what I'm about to tell you even more meaningful.
But I'm going to jump in here, Greg, too. But Destiny's just finished reading it for the 2nd time, so I think she could probably teach it. So
Well done, Destiny. And there is a book, by the way, called The Franchisee Factor, which I wrote for franchisor executives like many of you. And I've got another book called Profitable Partnerships, which has a chapter on the franchisee factor in it. And that book is written for franchisees and franchisor executives. And a lot of our clients give that book to all their franchisees as well as their franchisor executives. Let's take a look at the research first. So here's an analysis we conducted a few years ago on franchisee satisfaction over time. And that vertical axis is made up of 58 questions that we ask as part of we do franchisee satisfaction surveys. We've got very carefully worded questions we ask franchisees to measure that. And then we've got a timeline along the vertical axis. And let's have a look at how satisfaction moves over time. So note the trend line. So this was pretty exciting when we first did this, and I've repeated this experiment again because back in 1992, in the early stages when I'd started the business, I developed a model on what I thought the satisfaction trend would be based on my practical experience as a franchisee and as a franchisor executives. And here's what the original model looked like. So we call it the franchisee factor for reasons which will become obvious. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story because it's my story, in fact, about when I started with my business partner, John, who was the multi-unit franchisee who invited me to join him when I was at university. So I said, yeah, I'd love to be a franchisee in your business. My parents were proud of me. I took out a loan. And I was a very good operator because I've been managing stores, and our sales grew very quickly by 25%. So in 3 months in, we were going great. And John sat me down and took me through a financial statement for the quarter of how the business had been performing line by line. So we went through all our revenue lines like pastries and drinks and bread. And then we went through line by line all our expenses. And it was all in alphabetical order. So it started off with accounting and cleaning and so on. When we got down to the letter M, there was an NSF, which stood for management service fee, which was another way of saying royalty fee. It was around $10,000. And I asked him, hey, why have we paid all this money? And he said, oh, that's the 6.5% management service fee that we pay the franchisor. So I started to ask him more about why are we paying this fee? And he said, look, we just have to pay it. It's in the franchise agreement. So I started to think about what am I getting for my fees? And the next time that my business consultant, Ian, came to visit, I asked him. And Ian said to me, you should be pleased, Greg, at paying us these fees because your business is growing. You're up 25% in your sales. And I was actually insulted because as far as I was concerned, my business was growing because of me. Wasn't because of his marketing and his systems. So this is human psychology in action. And I remember saying to him, Ian, I've been here since 2 o'clock this morning, baking bread, coaching the team, serving customers. Now, when things go well in life, we tend to attribute this to our hard work, our talent, our creativity. When things don't go so well, it's human nature to blame other people or outside circumstances. And psychologists call this the attribution bias. And there's a whole field of social psychology called attribution theory. So here I am convinced that my success is all about me, and I'm discounting all the support and work the franchisors providing me. And it got worse. So my satisfaction continued to drop. Now, I had a lot of experience, baking bread, and I had a creative streak, I still do. And I thought of a great idea to reduce my cost of goods. If we could recycle the stale bread and resell it back to customers, I could get my cost of goods down. And I had this insight one night when I was at my mother's house and she served my favorite bread and butter pudding for dessert, which is made of stale bread. And I figured suddenly, wow, I could get all this stale bread, mush it all up with eggs and cinnamon and sugar and make a slice out of it, bake it off and sell it back to the customers. And sure enough, I created this recipe with the help of my mother. We baked off the bread and butter pudding slice. I trained the staff to give all the customers a taster when they came in that morning. And by 11 o'clock, we were sold out. And I put signs all over my walls in texter pen on paper bags with sticky tape saying bread and butter pudding, delicious, 15 cents a slice. Now, the next day, I did another batch and Ian, the field consultant, came in. And you can imagine Ian walking, I can still see his face when he stood in the door of my shop and he looked around. I had all these paper bag signs on the walls and I was standing with my bread and butter pudding slice, beaming at him, thinking, aren't I a genius? And the first thing he did, he came up and he said, you have to take down these signs and stop doing that. And we very quickly got into an argument. And I told him, you're not my boss. And if you can't give me ideas to improve my profitability, I don't have time for you. So he left with his tail between his legs. And I'm thinking, oh, I've won this one. Now, a couple of days later, I got a phone call from the CEO of the company. And he said, hi, Greg, love to take you out for lunch. And I said, Michael, as long as you pay, that'll be great. That was my way again of just having that little dig about the fees we're paying. So he picked me up the following day. We went into a little cafe not far from the store. We ordered and he asked me this question, Greg, what's on your mind? How are you going? How are you feeling about the business? Now, I've been thinking about this overnight and I just vented for 20 minutes a stream of complaints. The flour was too expensive. The marketing was hopeless. The fees were too high. I'm not getting value from the support, blah, 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 blah. Now, he never interrupted me. He never argued with me. He did ask clarifying questions and he had a pad like this one and he was taking notes. And after 20 minutes, he said, Greg, I've got a list of 8 issues that I've just summarized here. Could I just summarize these back to you? And if I haven't nailed it all, by all means, keep talking. And I thought, oh, that's reasonable. So he'd listened to me, so I listened to him. And he absolutely nailed my concerns. And over the next 20 minutes, he proved to me that he could see my perspective. He didn't agree necessarily, but he understood me. And certain things I agreed with him. There was just things I didn't know. Certain things we agreed to disagree. And certain things he said, look, you've got a good point there. I'm going to take that back and talk to the team about this. So he has moved me in about a half an hour from being this angry, argumentative franchisee to someone. You can see how I'm now in what I've called the C stage. I'm feeling listened to and we're having a conversation. Now, before we left the meeting, he said to me, Greg, just before we wrap up here today, I was feeling a lot better about the relationship and so on. Could I give you some feedback? And I thought, oh, okay. Well, I trust him. He's empathized. He was being reasonable. I felt he was being fair. And he said, you're getting a reputation as being a bit of a negative influence on the network. And he paused at that point. He said, would you like some examples? And he said it in a very respectful way, but he wasn't pulling his punches. And he explained that Ian, who was my field consultant, had asked for a transfer. The people at head office didn't like taking my calls. And some of them had said that they didn't want to deal with me because I was always arguing with them and making them feel bad. And he said, look, we value what you're doing. We think you run a great business, but we've got to develop a better way of working together. And I want you to think about this and we'll have another discussion about it. So I thought about it overnight. I asked for feedback from my business partner and from my fiance, who is still my wife. And they both agreed that I can be a little bit headstrong and difficult to deal with. And so I rang Michael back, I apologized, and we developed a far better working relationship, which I've called the we stage. Now, the relationship did go up and down from time to time, as it will, but I never went back down to that level of anger and frustration. So basically, every franchisee that you deal with, this is the franchisee factor, is going to go through, some will go through just mild dissatisfaction, some will go through more serious dissatisfaction like I did, and some will be down here and there's nothing you can do. That person is so angry or feels so betrayed about something that's gone on. The only resolution to that is they're going to need to leave the network. And your job is to get them out of the network with as much self-respect as possible, because you don't want that person as an enemy of the network starting an association and a website against your brand. That's not a good thing. So our goal as franchisor executives is to keep our franchisees into this zone of tolerance here by doing the things that I've been recommending, being fair, showing empathy, making good evidence-based decisions, being transparent, and so on. So we've covered a fair amount of ground today. I'd like to ask you, what's one insight that you've got from the session that we've conducted? What's something that's occurred to you? And I'd like you to pop it into the chat feed, please. It could be a little tip that you got, something you're going to think about, something you're going to talk to your colleagues more about, something that's validated your thinking already. So who's going to be first in with an insight? Thanks, Lauren. Yep, better understanding the franchisee perspective. Kara's got transparency. Who else is going to just pop in a comment here? And we've got a couple of minutes also, Katrina, happy to take some questions.
Great, Greg. So who has, we've got some questions that were emailed in earlier, but does anyone have any current questions based on the E factor or any of the content that Greg just presented? I'm still just, Greg, watching the...
Sure. And I love Christina's just summarized there. Thanks, Christina. Respect, status, importance, control, and fairness. These are factors. These are what we call social instincts that are programmed into our brains. So very good summary there. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the questions that was sent in to us ahead of time, Greg, was which leg in the franchise relationship stool do you think is the most important one?
No, I didn't cover the franchise relationship stool today. So let me just summarize this. So someone has obviously read some of my articles. By the way, I'll just pop something up on the screen for you here. I put out a tip every couple of weeks. And if you want to receive the tip, you can go to our website and we'll put you onto the mailing list. But I did one recently about the franchise relationship stool. So you have a legal relationship, which is the legal leg. You have a commercial relationship with your franchisees, which is to ensure that the model is working and they're making money and you're making money. And you have a psychological leg, which is all about trust and commitment. And I believe they're all important. You can't have a stool with one leg weak because the stool will fall over. But the one that is most neglected is the psychological leg, which is the one I've been focusing on today, which is all those things that build trust and commitment. So thank you. That's a great question.
Great. Thank you, Greg. We have, we're coming up. I don't want to take up too much more time, but a couple of things for anyone who's still on the line with us. We had a glitch with Zoom. Somehow they capped our attendance to 100. So we had way more than 100 people registered. And so what we're going to do is get with Greg's team and get another date to do a replay as soon as we can. And you'll get an email out from my team on that. The next thing that I wanted to mention is Greg has 4 different opportunities for North American franchisors to work directly with your teams. So the Culture of Franchising Workshop is one opportunity, Field Manager Bootcamp Foundation, Field Manager Bootcamp Advanced, and then also if you're doing a virtual conference, Greg can do live stream webcasts to connect with your franchisees. So those are just 4 customized opportunities for Greg and the FRI psychologists to work directly with North American franchise systems. The other thing that I'd like to announce is that in the first half of 2021, we have quite a few public events scheduled as well. And the difference between what I just mentioned and public events is for a public event, if you want to send 1 or 2 people, or 10 or 20, it'll be a mix of franchise brands all working together. And we have different opportunities around that as well, including the CEO masterclass. Greg, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, this is for C-level. So, heads of departments, heads of operations, heads of marketing, heads of IT, and so on. And we take you through what we call the franchisor wheel of excellence, which are the 5 critical areas to maintain this sustainable, successful franchise network that I talked about.
Great. Thank you. So we also have Greg's books. I put that in chat. We have bulk prices if you would like to purchase the books for your entire system. And I can just say personally, Greg, that's how you and I met. I was a franchisee, and our franchisor sent out 350 copies of Profitable Partnerships. And I hate to admit that I was in the free stage. And when I got to chapter 8 and read that my behavior was absolutely predictable, I was mortified, and I completely transformed my relationship with the franchisor overnight. So I thank you for that and the many years that we've had the chance to work together. So I am complete. If anyone has any last minute questions, throw them up in the chat. Great. Oh, yep, there. Thank you, Cassie. I do want to say next in 2 weeks, on January 27th at 1 Mountain Time, we're going to have a special guest, Michelle Rowan from Franchise Business Review. Franchise Business Review is launching a brand new study. It's franchising at work, and it's all about the well-being of employees, of people who are working in the franchise sector. So it's really exciting. It's very, very exciting, and Michelle's going to talk in detail about that. So more to come.
Lovely rest of day.
Yes, thank you so much, Greg. Really appreciate you getting up early for this.
Okay, bye-bye.